Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 17, The Current Puppy Boom. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. I can't believe that this is already episode 17, and we thought what better to talk about right now than the current puppy boom. So, before we get into this, my name is Mariano, that's Brent. We want to thank you guys so much for listening. I mean, this podcast has still been growing just at an immense rate. It's like tumbling over itself faster and faster. You can find us on Instagram, me at UNTAMEDDOGCO, that's UNTAMEDDOGCO, all one word. You can find Brent at CANISBEHAVIor, CANIS behavior. Again, all one word. Now, what we mean by the current puppy boom is with this whole thing, we've already talked a lot about COVID-19, so we're not really going to touch on it too much. But the thing is, during this time, and a lot of the lockdown stuff is still happening, even though it's kind of on its way out in places. I'm in Arizona and Brent's in California, and both places are kind of like phasing things back to normality. But a lot of people got dogs during this time, like a lot of people. And we wanted to talk about why that is. And, more specifically, what are some good tips and tricks that you guys can utilize to help you raise your puppies now and in the future? So with that being said, let's dive right in. How are you, man?
I'm good, man. How you been?
Pretty good.
It's been a week. A lot of things have happened. It's so funny. I found out a couple days ago because, with lockdown and just things being the way that they are, and also this being a very busy training season for most dog trainers, I just found out a few days ago we were in June. It's crazy. It's crazy. I was like, it's June 4th already.
I'm not lying to you. I had that exact same thought the day before yesterday. No joke.
Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy how that happens?
Because I got the truck, and so I had to do the insurance on it, and I was like, wow, it's already June? Jeez, okay.
We are halfway through 2020, guys. This is nuts. But anyways, let's get back on subject. So as Mariano was saying, there's a huge puppy boom, right? Literally, we get calls every single day, at least 3 to 5 calls every single day about brand new puppies, puppy questions. There are some people that were early to get the puppies, but we're starting to see even now 3 months later into COVID-19, we see people getting puppies now for the first time, 8 weeks old, 9 weeks old, 10 weeks old. So there's a huge boom in the growth of puppies. And as dog trainers, one of the big things that we are huge advocates for is preventative dog training, right? Pretty much if we can raise dogs the right way from the get-go, now we can lower the number of the amount of dogs going into shelters in adolescence. Now we can make sure that people adapt and grow very well with their animals in the house. And you know what? There's so many first-time puppy owners that we're seeing, young millennials who are either coupled up or just realize that it's the first time that they actually want to get a dog, as adults. And so we're starting to see a lot of first-time questions. We're starting to see, maybe I had a dog when I was younger, but now I don't. Now I'm getting a dog first time as an adult. Some of these people are off of work. Some of these people are still working just from home. So there's just a whole variety of different things and questions that we're getting. And so in today's podcast, we really just want to cover some of the things that we're seeing that we feel really need to be advised and addressed for the public. Because those of you guys who have a puppy and have opened your homes up to new members of the family, doing it right the first time is going to save you a lot of headaches, a lot of sadness, and a lot of money in the long term. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of stress from the puppy's perspective.
Yeah. So if we can raise our puppies really, really well from the get-go, we'll be able to have a long lasting relationship with our dogs. And as dog trainers, that's literally the only thing we care about, right? We want our dogs and our humans to stay together as long as possible. So let's go ahead and kind of just dive into our first prompt. So as we mentioned, the biggest reason people got puppies is because for the first time in probably their adult lives or in a long time, we start saying we have time to raise a dog, right? We're actually home. We're actually able to be present. We all know in theory that puppies take a lot of work to raise. However, we want to make sure that you guys hone in that work in the right areas because there's a lot of common mistakes that we see coming up.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's funny too, because yes, I mean, everyone or most people had extra time at home. And I know that was a big factor in it because you and I have been talking to people like at dog parks or just clients and Just before we started recording this evening here, we were talking about, I got like 3 or 4 calls just yesterday all about puppies under like 16 weeks. And it just seems like people have time at home. And so they figure, hey, I mean, it just worked out, which is great. But also there was, I know we talked about this in the past a little bit because of COVID and people having to kind of make space from each other and trying to clean up, and like, what's the word? Like be as efficient as possible with stuff. Shelters had to clear out, rescues had to clear out. So they had to find like real quick, either temporary or permanent situations for puppies and older dogs. So a lot of people took on puppies. A lot of them took them on as like temporary fosters. A lot of them just straight up adopted them. And a lot of them started as one and kind of moved to the other as they realized, like, I just love this dog. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a funny time. I mean, summer is typically a busy season for dog training in general, at least in North America. I mean, it might be different elsewhere where like the seasons are different, but yeah, it's been a funny one. It didn't quite work out exactly how we thought, but I guess nothing really did.
Right, right. Nothing really did. But we're seeing a lot of good also come from this as well. So we have these new passionate dog owners, and I think the big thing we want to talk about just straight off the bat, let's go ahead and just talk about, as dog trainers, some of the common errors or mistakes that we see people make in puppy raising. So if those of you who are listening or you guys know someone who just got a puppy, please send them this episode of the podcast because I think it's going to be highly educational for people. And it's crazy. It's dog training has a lot of stages to it. And I would say puppy raising is one of the most important stages of dog training, dog raising, whatever you want to call it. So let's go ahead and just jump into some of the things we see people doing wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And before we do, I just want to, if you're going to send this episode to someone who just got a puppy, not to shameless plug, but I think that the Deeper Look series, we did like 5 or 6 episodes that we titled Deeper Look into different things. And there's a few in there that I think would be absolutely hugely beneficial for someone who got a puppy. Stuff like the socialization one, the pure positive reinforcement one, the balance training one. There's just so many aspects of that I want to make sure that, it's our job. We started this podcast because we just wanted to give people as much useful information as possible. So just keep that in your head if you're planning on sending this out, which we appreciate, by the way. Consider those as well. They'll help.
Right.
So what people do wrong. I'm going to start with lack of boundaries. And, it's funny. Brent and I were talking the other day. We really love the amount of support we get from this, and we take this super serious. And we were listening back to our episode about structure and like why that episode does really well I mean, all of them have been doing well, but this one has like really been kind of just outperforming a ton of the others. And we thought it was because the reason why we chose to do structure was because structure is a word that's so like vague. And so people are like, I hear what you're saying, and I hear every dog trainer on YouTube saying that, but like, what does that mean? How do I do structure? And boundaries, I think, is another one of those. And it's one of those where they're like, okay, well, like boundaries, like how? I mean, they're not like kids, or that's what everybody tells me, or whatever the case. So people tend to lack boundaries, and we're going to dive into that more as we get into some proper puppy raising tips and techniques and things like that. But lack of boundaries, I feel like is almost a blanket that can encompass most, if not all, of the other things that people do wrong. And I'll let you touch on some too. I just wanted to throw that out there, and then I'll get off my soapbox here.
Yeah. So yeah, lack of boundaries or like just giving the dog too much freedom in general. This is, I think, probably the number one mistake new puppy owners create. Right. A lot of times what I see is there are people, let's say you're a first time dog owner. If you're a first time dog owner, a lot of times we kind of relate to having dogs when we were kids, right? Or you're a first-time dog owner in general, right? You've never owned an animal before or kept them as a pet before. So there's a learning curve there. However, if we did have animals when we were smaller, like when we were children, a lot of times our experience is, my dog, had full reign of the house, or my dog lived in the backyard, or my dog could run around wherever he wanted. And so sometimes this kind of primes our brains and plants a seed into our heads that this is what dogs need. Dogs need freedom. Right. And so many times I'll hear from people that they go, I wouldn't dare get a dog until I have a house with a yard. Right. And they said that when they were 21, and now they're 33 and they still don't have a house with a yard. So they therefore don't have a dog. But the funny thing is during COVID, those same people decided to get a dog. So that's the interesting part. So a lot of times our minds are primed to think that dogs require freedom. Now, I would say dogs totally require exercise. They do require stimulation. They do require room to move, but there's many ways to supplement this. walks and exercises at a park, dog parks, daycares, all that type of stuff. However, a lot of times with very small puppies, and again, we're talking under 16 weeks of age, people just give the dog a lot of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And unfortunately, what a lot of freedom usually leads to, it leads to potential problems and expectations and the development of bad behaviors that people have to spend a lot of money on later to fix or reverse or just manage. Right. A couple of those things would be, and then I'll go ahead and hand this over to you. Like we see that puppies develop very undesirable expectations from owners when they have a lot of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So some expectations would be like, I always want you to be around to play with me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So many times I get calls from people that they say, oh my gosh, my puppy is biting me all the time. So that automatically puts a light bulb in my head. And it's like, biting you all the time? Oh, so if all the time he's biting you, that means all the time he has access to you. Right. That's kind of the correlation. Right. So my follow-up question is, where does your dog hang out all day? And 99.9% of the time, the answer is, my dog just kind of follows me everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so what this does is when the dog has a lot of freedom, unfortunately, you become your dog's favorite plaything. And this is going to lead to biting you, chasing you, nipping at you. It's going to lead to all of these very, I guess what I would consider to be very childish, annoying behaviors, because you are your dog's favorite thing. Right. Which on an emotional level, there's nothing wrong with that. But on a behavioral level, your dog doesn't learn how to play with anything else or develop any other hobbies or habits. And this obsession with you as their owner is sweet, but at the same time, not healthy for puppy development.
Yeah, well, I tell people all the time that the puppy, like the context of everything is perfectly fine. He's not being aggressive if he's nipping at you, but it's still inappropriate. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of the big difference, because kids can do things meaning well, but it doesn't make it the right thing to do. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that the interesting thing about developing these false expectations, even kind of on like an emotional level from the puppy's perspective, it hinders them a little bit when they think of you as like this object that they have constant access to, because then that kind of hinders other aspects of training that are huge, like socializing. How do you socialize, or how do you, like, let's say, desensitize a puppy to something that they're nervous about, and maybe rightfully so, like the loud ass garbage truck, or or something
Mm-hmm.
like that, when they're not confident that you're someone who can kind of keep them safe and keep them, like,
Mm-hmm.
hold them to a very clear understanding of what things should be. You're just kind of that plaything. And two, when a puppy has not constant access, but just doesn't know how to behave with you, they are never given the opportunity to kind of think of themselves as another variable in any equation. They're just kind of like, oh, I see another dog off leash. I would hate this all the time in LA. Like, I'd go, because I used to live in LA too. So like,
Mm-hmm.
Runyon Canyon was horrible with this. I'd be walking my dogs on leashes. People's dogs would be like 40 yards ahead of them, bolting into my dogs' faces, and my dogs aren't always super friendly. And they're waving at me, oh, it's okay, he's friendly. I'm like, yeah, they're not. And like,
Yeah.
and dogs, puppies, I mean, what do you expect? They don't know any better, and it's hard to blame the dog, even if they're older. But a puppy especially, it's good to teach them that, like, yeah, it's great to play, it's great to socialize, but always keep in mind there's more to the equation than just, do I want to do this right now? It's like, well, does mom want to play with me back, or am I
Mm-hmm.
being a nuisance?
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge thing that I notice in puppies.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, and our job is to kind of just put the dog in the right situation so that habit doesn't get out of hand, right? We
Right.
want to play with dogs, but here's the thing is we have to play with dogs when we have complete attention on dogs, right? Too much freedom usually leads to a lot of demanding of attention, right? Where the dog will literally interrupt you anytime that you're not paying much attention to them, in the middle of a work meeting, a Zoom call, a telephone call while you're cooking. So just simply, again, too much freedom opens up a lot of doors. Also, what too much freedom does, it opens up a lot of doors for the dog to develop other bad behaviors, like chewing your shoes or destroying your couch or pooping and peeing in the wrong part of the house, developing an obsession with your underwear, right? Which is, so, I know it sounds gross, but like so many calls I get, several calls a year of the puppy eating someone's underwear, and they have to take the dog to the vet to take that underwear out of their stomach, right? Things like that. But also what happens is when you become your dog's number one, which I know in theory we want, right? We want the dog to think of us as number one, but we want him to think of us as number one in a slightly different way that we'll explain later. It also affects how our dogs socialize with the real world, right? So especially right now with COVID, right, where we're not really allowed to socialize or interact with many people. I can't explain to you how many puppy sessions I've done within the last month where I've walked into a house and the puppy, who should just be super excited to see a person, who should normally run up to me, kiss me, take treats from me. I can't explain to you how many puppies have ran away from me, barked at me, and it's taken me 5 to 10 minutes to get these dogs to warm up to me. Right. And it's even gotten to this point where I thought, maybe it's my mask. Maybe it's because I have a mask on when I'm going into these houses. So I asked the owners, I said, when I first meet your puppy, is it okay if I take my masks off? And the strange thing, it doesn't help. These dogs are not being socialized outside of their homes. They're not being socialized with the real world, right? Because we've kind of been taught the last couple months that we need to stay inside, right? So yeah, that's also a factor. But also, let's say we finally get to this point where, okay, your dog's ready, he's fully vaccinated, you want to take him out. You want to take him out to a dog park, for example. So many times I see dogs who cling to their owners as safety blankets because the codependency and the comfort with that owner is all that they know. Right. So that also becomes a hindrance in the dog socialization a little bit later. Right.